All right then. So I need to get on with this story I was telling in the first. Am I going to call these episodes? The first episode. Basically, in summary, I had briefly mentioned that I used to search for exercises and stuff online for my pupils and for myself to practice. And I, one day, whilst doing this, stumbled across superchops.com. At super-chops.com, which I believe still exists at the time of recording. Even if it doesn't, go to web.archive.org and you can find all of these old websites. Browsing Calit.com from around the year 2000 is great. I really like that old website. It was just basically a website for his shop, but he had the Super Chops tips on there. And if you want any of the good information about his old mouthpieces, better to find it there than on his on the current website, which may or may not still exist if you're watching this in the future. So I stumbled across superchops.com. I then, as a result of finding the name Jerome Calit, discovered that there is a dedicated section to his techniques on the Trumpet Herald forum. Again, I'm really actually quite concerned that at some point all of that's going to disappear, because I found it to be an invaluable resource over the years, just reading about other people struggling to understand this stuff. And seeing that basically the same few explanations can get you out of most of that confusion was a really helpful thing for me. Always just go back to the sound. If you're making the right sound, you're probably doing the right thing. Let's pretend that's yes. I'll go with that. Okay. And so in 1st of November 2012, I said to myself, I've got 6 weeks until my next gig. So 3 weeks to try out this technique. And if I'm ruined after 3 weeks, I've got 3 weeks to get it back. And it worked. I think for the most part at that point, I was trying to do this thing on a Warburton 5MC mouthpiece, which I guess would either have been with a KT backbore or a 7-star. I know those are the ones that I had. At the time, that was the smallest mouthpiece that I could play on, which is kind of ludicrous to me now because I consider it to be large. Or at least, not in the grand scheme of things, but it's bigger than what I normally play on. I could definitely get away with playing in an orchestra on a Warburton 5MC, because I make a big sound on small equipment as a direct result of using TCE. And also as a result of having used very small mouthpieces for a decade. That's another really important part, is that you do adapt to stuff over time, and that the sound you're trying to create in your mind will come out of the horn eventually. But then you have to consider whether or not you are compromising or trying too hard to force that sound to happen. And if that's the case, then you're probably better off changing anyway. I'm so good at going off on tangents. So I know that I did that gig, which was a Handel's Messiah on my piccolo trumpet with Schilke 15B mouthpiece. And I remember on the gig that my tongue would disconnect from the bottom lip. So, I would argue as a teacher of the technique that, the embouchure is falling apart. You are not maintaining this technique. But what this opens up is it introduces us to the idea that, some people would say TCE is this thing. It is a way of playing whereby you have the tongue in this forward position, touching the lips from side to side through the teeth, in contact with the inside of both lips. Your primary form of note production is a spitting action, because this will cause you to pressurize the air inside your mouth, and then before the air is released, and that's what's going to sort of give you that centered sound. and a lot more control. In order to be doing a TCE well, you will need to have different habits with your facial muscles. So no stretching here, but looser corners and more central lip control. That in the last video, I talked a little bit about chickens and eggs and which comes first, and do the lungs grip the tongue? Do the lips grip the tongue, or does the tongue grip the lips? And I would say yes. Yeah, one or the other. But anyway, this thing. The number of times you see Ralph Salamone doing this in his videos, and when you're familiar with that sensation, you know what it means. When you're not familiar with it, it's probably just meaningless. You're not feeling that engagement of what you know to work well. Anyway, so that's what, and using very little air. This is one of the biggest things, is that that you can have the tongue in the right position. You can be doing the right thing with the lips, but if you're overblowing, then it all falls apart. And it can be it's a very fine balance. And I would say that it's such a fine balance that most unexperienced players will not be able to figure it out. I've a small number of my teenaged pupils in the past were curious enough to go down the TCE path for I would say probably just a couple months, and although they were able to improve their sound, and maybe even get over that initial note production struggle, essentially they, once you're concerned about, can I play this piece of music? Can I hit that high note in the Neruda concerto? Can I tongue fast enough? As soon as you're worrying about those things, those details, you can't be concerned about this at the same time. It's just too much. This is, I perfectly understand why people bang on about paralysis by analysis. I have counter arguments to paralysis by analysis, but I can see, if you're not thinking about the music when you're performing music, then yeah, you're swimming in custard, aren't you? This is the thing. I would say that we practice technique so that you don't need to think about technique. And that goes for embouchure development. It goes for, yes, I think that TCE is the best solution to a lot of problems. But it has to be advanced. It has to be developed. And I think that for the purpose of most teenage pupils that I had in the past, I wouldn't have wasted their time by insisting that they commit themselves to this system, when what they're doing already basically works. I've had better results in helping people to understand how the embouchure should work and what we should be doing with the air in very general terms, rather than insisting that people commit to the TCE. That doesn't mean that at some point in someone's development that it isn't the best thing for them to do, because I still think that the TCE is in terms of fundamentals, it gives us everything we need to get this instrument working. But if you've got years of pre-existing habits and you don't have years of time to commit to undoing those habits, then maybe it might not be worth your effort if you're not going to be a professional player, or if you're not going to, for any number of reasons that are very individual to lots of people. And just to tie this up and to bring it full circle to what I was talking about in a previous video, this is one of the reasons that Jeff Smiley's balanced embouchure method appeals to me so much as a teacher, because you can do these exercises and then forget about them. And the sort of NLP sort of, the depositing of information into your subconscious through working at certain exercises, showing your body what it's capable of doing in terms of lip position and use of the tongue and stuff. That's probably a very good approach for the majority of people. And I've sort of talked in the past with people about how actually you can treat the TCE exercises in the same way if you want to, not if you want to be committed to the ideology, but if you want to just practice your 5 articulations alongside Einsätze and Ansätze and double pedal tones, and then and you don't particularly care whether the end result is a perfect execution of the TCE, then you're probably good to go, and you will develop very finely as a player. I'm not sure. I'm convincing myself that there actually isn't much more to it than that anyway. But there we go. I mean, yeah, a lot of this stuff, the ideology makes it also confusing. Where do I fit into this spectrum of analysis versus music making? I have no idea what part of the story I was up to. I talked about my mouthpiece, Shilky 15. Oh yeah, so after I bought the Shilky, after I did the gig on the Shilky 15B, which had been my piccolo mouthpiece for many years, at that point, I then bought a Khaled Super Chops 4 mouthpiece at his recommendation, and I used it exclusively. Let's not lie about it. I pretty much used it exclusively for a solid 6 months. The reason I don't want to tell you untruths, I also happen to have bought a Jerome Khaled New York solo mouthpiece off of eBay, which I used to like to play with as well. But I used those 2 mouthpieces exclusively for that period of time, and they were extremely different from anything I had been able to play on in the past. And so, that was a big part of the development for me, is that I had to, when you go to playing on a really shallow cup after years of playing on a Vincent Bach 1 1/4 C, a 3C, a 7C, and like I said, the smallest mouthpiece I could use was a Warburton 5MC. You learn this key thing, which to me, to this day, is still probably the most important lesson, and that is you've got to keep your lip out of the cup. And this is another thing where it comes back to that overblowing that I was talking about before. Most people's habit is to blow their lip into the cup. It was certainly my habit. My habit was to stretch the top lip, pin it in place with the rim of the mouthpiece, and blow. And the embouchure collapses into the mouthpiece. Now, here's an interesting thing. The effect that actually has is that it makes the mouthpiece physically smaller. It makes it shallower, and it probably doesn't actually make it less wide, but because your lip is in there occupying the space, you're effectively not using the full volume of the cup, or even its shape, in fact. And so this is the deal, is that if your embouchure is already collapsed into the mouthpiece, as you ascend in pitch, it's already your structural integrity of the of your vibrating surface, if you like. Here we go with terminology. This is getting into the nonsense territory, and I recognize it. But the structural integrity of what's going on here with your lips is compromised. And what are you going to do? Are you going to use more pressure to push the lips back together? Probably. Are you going to blow harder because now everything's squished together and you can't get the air through? Probably. Does that make the problem worse? Absolutely. Yes. So this is what happens when we're taught that the best way to make a big sound is to play on a big mouthpiece, because you don't learn to have chop focus and discipline. And that's what playing on the Super Chops 4 mouthpiece and the Khaled New York solo mouthpiece, for me, over a 6-month period, that's what it did for me, is it taught me that lesson that you just got to stop tanking air through the trumpet. because as soon as you use less air, you can get the tongue further forward. You get more focused airstream. You can get easier compression of the air inside the mouth. You get more resistance in the place where the resistance is meant to be, which is right at the final point of release. And once the resistance to the airstream, which is focused by the tongue, once the resistance to the airstream is in the right place, then you stop creating it in the wrong places, such as I'm going to say in the throat, though I've had some interesting conversations about that topic recently. You're going to stop creating tension by receding the tongue and blocking the top of the throat. You're going to stop relying on, you're going to stop wanting the mouthpiece to be open or the way that people want mouthpieces to be, basically. You'll be able to relax here, you'll be able to engage here. And that means that you'll be playing easier. And it may actually feel like there's less resistance because you get less of that sort of like negative feedback, that stuffy feeling where the instrument's backing up on you and you just can't get enough air through it. And it's interesting because obviously this is the opposite of what's actually going on. You're using less air, but it feels like you're using more, you have the ability to use more power. And actually, that's what all Jerome Callett's older Super Chops stuff was about. And that's really one of the key things that guides us through from the Trumpet Yoga days into Super Chops, and what maintains from Super Chops into TCE. Because although the mechanism for creating the resistance of the airstream changes from being just the lips to being the combination of lips and tongue, the actual what we're going after, this goal, this is creating resistance in the right place, is what it's all about. Let's finish it off in a second, but I just want to say that what happened next was I bought a Super Chops 3 mouthpiece, which is smaller than the Super Chops 4. And believe it or not, I've always found that mouthpiece makes a better sound, or I make a better sound on that mouthpiece. I don't think it's an anatomy thing. I think that it's a more balanced design. I'm just not sure that the Super Chops 4 was a good idea, but other people used it and had a lot of success. Good for them. At this point, we're up to around, it's kind of May or June 2013. Yeah. I know what the topic of the next video is going to be, so I should get on and make that. Okay, thanks for watching, guys.